Hi, I'm James Brookes, and welcome to From the Factory Floor, a conversational podcast about all things startup and tech, brought to you by the folks at Thestartupfactory.tech. And welcome back to From the Factory Floor. I'm your host, James, and actually joined again by Ian after his hiatus of looking at fantasy football. How are you doing, Ian?
I'm not bad, thank you. Yes, I've had 6 months off podcasting, not through any particular plan or intention, but you've just not invited me back.
Oh, you needed a breather, and you were so busy writing up all the fantasy football stuff that we didn't want to take up too much more of your time.
Absolutely. We shall see. New season beckons. So
yeah, and as a very quick plug, if anyone wants to join the TSF Fantasy Football League, feel free to. It's also got you on today because I think one of the things that we've noticed most about our startups we work with at TSF is really how once they've got the platform, how they then start to move into that sales pipeline and really start to progress things through. So it really is a case of when do you think is the best time for startups to actually start looking at their sales pipeline and start to generate interest?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, sales. It's not everyone's cup of tea. And I think all founders need to look at themselves as the first salesperson, to be honest. So they often, focus on the product rather than the customer problem. And if you if you prioritize the stakeholders in any startup, the most important stakeholder is the customer. The second most important stakeholder stakeholders are then your team. Without customers, you're not going to generate cash. You're not going to be able to attract and grow a team. So it's a little bit misplaced, the total focus on product at the outset. I think it's more about the customer problem, the market. And before sales, you should be thinking about marketing. Your question about when you start, I think you start in parallel. Because your MVP is much about a process and testing and talking to potential customers, getting the brand out there, knowing about people, what they currently use in terms of a competitive product. So I'd start with marketing, and I'd start with that probably the week after you started your MVP POC build, to be honest. And I think the most important message there within this opening blurb is all founders have got to be salespeople. Founder-led sales in the early days are what it's all about. People will buy from you as the founder because of your passion and the connection you make, but not everyone wants to be a salesperson.
No, I mean, I did sales early in my career and it wasn't for me. And obviously it's not exactly turned out badly here, but I think I can echo your statement on the importance of focusing on the problem. I think I've said to a lot of our founders recently that as much as it's a tech platform, you're solving a problem, and it's a user
Absolutely.
platform, and the tech can do anything you want. So really in your sales, focus on the problem and why you've chosen to actually fix this. The fact that tech is the solution to it is almost a byproduct of your selling the service and fixing the problem, because every man his dog seems to have a tech platform these days. So it's why your particular solution fits their problem.
Yeah. So I think we're going to do a marketing podcast next week, aren't we? So they're kind of the wrong way around, but they're not. People think marketing is easy, and it's not. It's about intelligent marketing. It's about content, podcasts, blogs, thought pieces, webinars, attending events, building partnerships, things like that. There's lots to go into marketing. But let's start with sales, because I do think that's the engine. Getting out of the building, getting those meetings, getting in front of people to understand what their problem is. And to be perfectly frank, if you don't think you can sell, get some training. I think both in terms of the sales process, use of data, what is your sales plan? What's your target market? How are you going to get out there? Who do you want these conversations with? And lead generation. I mean, it's one of the things we've spent a lot of time this year working with them, some of the startups in our portfolio, to kind of get that conversation going about if you're sat in front of a customer, what's their persona, what's their need, why would they buy from you? And the other thing as well, most of the founders that come to TSF are pretty nice people. So people have got this kind of this blind spot about selling, and selling to me is actually dead straightforward. It's all about building relationships and creating trust. It's not focusing on the transaction. And every founder has a story. So storytelling and listening are key sales tools. It's not about hammering away and kind of making fairly aggressive numbers of phone calls and things like that. But if you don't get in front of people who could buy your product once you are ready to go, then you're going to struggle. You are going to struggle.
Now, I know when we started to do design sprints, we always looked at 5 people. And I know one of the things that you've always spoken to founders about when they started says, what's their Fab 5? Looking at what's the, like you said, it's about the same as the marketing. It's about being intelligent in what you're doing and not just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. It's about really, again, going back to the problem, which is always where I've been focusing a lot at the moment, is the problem, who it's for, who's the right person to speak to. Obviously, there's a bit of nuance here between sort of B2B and B2C as well, that I think B2C often you've got a much bigger expectation of marketing, but again, you can be intelligent with how you approach it. So
yeah, if you look at FreeUp, which has been a very patient build of the technology, the hardware, the software. They're building a SaaS platform, the data. But what Tom's been really good at is articulating the proposition and doing pilots and tests with different aspects of the market. So, we've gone with regulators in the water sector in terms of how useful would this be for compliance issues. We've gone with the utilities, the distribution network, and we've looked at indoor water and outdoor water as applications of the product, and different problems, different decision makers, different budgets. And then, of course, you've got the tier 1 supply network, who are helping some of the utilities digitize their network, their kind of raft of digital Victorian assets that they now need to make digital. And then there's consultancies. So I think it's about being thoughtful from your sales process at the outset. And I mentioned briefly storytelling, and one of the things we help coach our founders through is that storytelling of their journey, why this is a problem, why they're passionate about it, the experience they've had, the conversations, the kind of the case studies and stuff like that. So people need to let go of selling as not the experience you get when you go into a mobile phone shop and you're hounded to take a high tariff and this is the best device for you. B2B sales is very different to B2C, as you mentioned. And I think you need to kind of create yourself a bit of a package. And that's really what I've got to talk about a little bit more, really, kind of 5 key takeaways on this podcast to give founders the foundation. And this is something we work really hard because, understandably, and in fact we do, you fall in love with the idea, you fall in love with the tech, you go, wow, this is great, but who's going to pay for it? So you do need to be quite thoughtful about your sales. And like I said, I've got 5 takeaways really just to unpack on this podcast.
Well, I guess it'd be rude for me to not say what are those 5, and then we can dig into each one of those a little bit.
Okay, well, I'll carry on doing all the work. Well, that's fair comment. So, the first thing I'd say is think about sales as a process. Like I say, the old selling was all about getting the order, filling the opportunity, try to convince why you should buy from me, and then a very kind of direct approach. Whereas I think for a tech product or indeed a tech service startup, it's all about how we're going to make a difference. What's the challenges, the problems that you've not been able to overcome that we may be able to help you. So there's a combination here of kind of 2 approaches: value-led selling and solution selling. Both are established processes about the value of what you're offering, why you add more value, why you're different. And solution selling, well, the keys in the title there. One of the things which, again, founders need to think through more for me is that in your first 6 to 12 months, it's more about demand generation and lead generation and kind of creating awareness. And we'll pick up on some of that in the marketing piece. So, showing you're making a difference, showing you're creating value, and showing your personal business values and your knowledge. It's one thing that Tom at FreeUp has been exceptional about in terms of his knowledge and almost kind of making people say, look, I need to work with you. You can add to my thinking. So that building that relationship and rapport, but there is a sales process around making the difference, creating the demand, demonstrating value, and you can do that through pilots or testing programs, but then really kind of making your presence felt in terms of, you're someone I need to work with.
I think it comes down to people's authenticity at times. I know that's what we always look for, and you keep going back to Tom. I think it's a great example. Is someone who has experienced that problem with his background, his scientific, going through his PhDs to actually then create the device means that he does know what he's talking about and he's experienced the problem. I think Reese at Social Plug as well has got a very clear story going back to what he said before in terms of his experience as an actor, how he took that through to what he does now with Social Plug. And that kind of really creates the value of, I know what the problem is, here's the solution and why it's valuable to you. And I think they're two of the really good stories that we've seen, especially recently at TSF.
Reese Social Plug is a good one, because if I think about Reese, what he's good at as the founder is about building rapport and trust. I've kind of just thought about what does this process look like? So building rapport and trust, which I think Reese is exceptional at. I think that's really, you probably need to spend about 40% of your time on doing that. Trusting you, because as a startup, you're new kids on the block. I may be your first paying customer. So, that phrase, why should I buy from you, is a bit of a killer question that people need to look at. I think the other thing which Reese does very well is identifying requirements. And I reckon that's about another, say, 30% of the sales process. So you're not even talking about pricing. You're not even talking about the features, the benefits of what you're doing. 70% of that time so far is all about building rapport and trust and speaking to the customer, sitting the customer side of the table, understanding their challenges. I think then you can then launch into, right, I've got something here of interest and a value to you. And again, you need to make sure from a startup perspective that every customer opportunity isn't bespoke. And equally, it's not wash, rinse, repeat, but you do need a repeatable, scalable sales model. So I kind of think that's about 20%. And the bit which then people fear is closing and asking for the deal. And that's only 10%, if I've got my maths right.
Yep,
the rest of it is about getting the relationship, getting the trust, creating the rapport, understanding the customer's problem, providing a solution of value. And then you do have to ask for the order. You do have to ask, right, is this something you're interested in? What you're prepared to pay for it? This is my pricing strategy and structure. And you do need to have, that edge to you to actually ask for the deal. But in the core sales process, they're the four steps for me. But only 10% is the kind of the bit where it's like, once more with feeling, I need to ask for this deal.
It's amazing how little is actually about the figures at the end. A lot of the time, like I say, it's the closing it, agreeing what the scope is, but actually having that relationship with people, like when startups come to us, because a lot of times they haven't looked at numbers or anything. It is about building that relationship with the person, trusting that person. Are they the right person to do it? And then obviously one of the things we have looked at is, do we think they'll be able to sell this, and are they authentic enough to do it? And I know that's a big part of our process of onboarding startups. And then obviously eventually when they hopefully fledge and go on to bigger and better things, look at people like Mark Hartley, obviously just news sector so well. I say Reese, Tom, all the founders that you look at, you can really...
Mark Hartley is an interesting one because, Bankify is one of the success stories so far from our portfolio. And what I liked about Mark, and this takes me into my second point, which is about building relationships. Mark was very much connected, understood the sector, understood the sales process, but was very much a relationship building person, a very compelling individual. And it's back to the phrase I used a couple of minutes ago about, I want to work with this person because he can help my business. And if you look at the attributes of someone like Mark, and it is interesting, one of the things you said earlier about how we choose the projects to work with. Yes, the tech's interesting. Yes, the market opportunity is interesting. But can we work with this individual, and do we think that individual can sell? And what I thought Mark had in bucket loads was credibility. He understood the market space he wanted to operate in, understood the problem. He was reliable. He was kind of a very professional, focused, had real clarity of thought. He wasn't going to change his mind 6 months into the build. And I think that reliability translates itself into building, developing, and sustaining customer relationships. And then intimacy, which is perhaps a strange word that not many people would use in a sales podcast vocabulary. But by intimacy, I mean a genuine person. With Mark, you could talk about anything. And, personally very engaging. And therefore, that comes back to trust. So credibility, reliability, intimacy, authenticity, humility. For me, the second stage for a founder in the sales strategy is all about building relationships, and people buy from people. It's an old hackneyed, overused phrase, but it's true. If I trust you, if I respect you, you've got some credibility, I think I can rely on you, and you're going to share some interesting stuff with me, then I'll consider buying from you.
There's a balance there, because obviously you're not expecting, again, to steal one of your phrases, you're not expected to go on holiday with these people. It's not that level of relationship, but you should be able to walk into a meeting room or walk into somewhere to go and have a coffee, talk about your product, and have a genuine conversation. And there's obviously some personal side to that and being open, but at the end of the day, you are always, the last stage of this is you are going to be closing something. So just being aware that you are doing the important bit.
No, it is. You need to ask for the order. But one of the things, one of the words you used there was a conversation. So we've used some fairly soft language here. We haven't used qualification, or we haven't used pitch, because I just don't think the modern way of selling is oriented around that. Yes, you need to qualify if they've got a budget. Yes, you need to qualify the time. Excuse me. Should we start again? Because I've just burped on my cucumber sandwich. We need, you do need to qualify, and there is a hard element of sales. Don't get me wrong, but it's all about building that relationship. And you use the word conversation, and it's a sales conversation, not a sales pitch. And that is an important differentiator, I think, to the old way of selling. And hopefully, we'll start to put some founders listening to this podcast at ease that it's just be yourself. Create that rapport, a personality and engagement level, and step into the conversation. Now, one of the things, the third point, is the critical conversation, as you said, because I'm a nice guy, I've got an interesting product, but at the end of the day, if the customer can buy it from you for 100 grand rather than 250 grand, of course they will. So, you do need to present the business case and the value, and be clear on your pricing, and be able to justify your pricing in terms of the value you're creating. But I think the critical customer conversation comes as a framework. And this is something I've banged the drum on for a number of years. So for me, it's all about starting with engagement. It is all about, you've got that opportunity to actually meet face-to-face, or you've got a Zoom call, or you've bumped into somebody at an event. And I think, again, if the founders that are not confident about selling, just think about this as a toolkit. So create engagement and listen. So all you're doing is introducing yourself, identifying who you are, what the opportunity, and there's a whole language set about, if I understand your problems correctly, or what challenges have you got in the business the way you think I might be able to help. Lots of use of open questions as a style, just to create that conversation, and then listening and picking up and framing it back. So if I've heard you rightly, James, what you said to me, these are the 3 key challenges you've got, and the current solutions aren't working very well, and they're expensive. So you just start to evidence that you've listened in this critical conversation and frame it back in their language. And then you kind of have to take them on the journey. So the storytelling is really important in sales. And obviously at the outset, you might not have got much of a storyboard going in your startup, but you'll have some anecdotes. So kind of create this storyboard of what working with you may be like, what benefits and solutions your product could answer. So visioning what the future could be as a relationship. And then you start again and you go around listening and framing. So you kind of gel. So if you think about it as a negotiation with a small N, you end up actually quite adjacent to each other. And you've not discussed price or anything like that, but you've kind of created some engagement, you've created trust, and then you can ask for the commitment. So if I can provide you with this solution, and this is broadly where your challenges are, would you be interested? So you create some commitment. And my experience, and a lot of people will disagree with this, but my experience is unless the customer asks about price, just continue the conversation or get to a point where you can send them a proposal or an overview of how you can work together. The moment you start putting prices down, which you do need to, but it's a bit early in the conversation, you're into budgets, you're into cost, whereas you're still into value, you're still into evidencing value of yourself, the value, the potential of what it can be. But that commitment, you do need to get to that commitment. And again, a lot of people and a couple of folk in our portfolio aren't great at doing this. They're not not confident enough, I don't think, in saying, okay, really good conversation. I think we've established a lot of common ground. Really grateful for your time. What I'd like to do now is send you a proposal. And as a founder, you need to respect your time and the opportunity. You need to be filling that funnel of opportunities. So at a point in time in that conversation, you do need to get commitment.
No, I think one of the things there as well is where if you are realising you're not aligned with someone, also being able to understand that you're not particularly going to be able to fix their issue because that's not what you offer. I think that's almost what you're saying before around you don't want to say, I can do everything, which I know is something that we've had before with founders going, yeah, we can fix that, we can fix this, we can fix that. And then the tech solution becomes so much bigger, so much more complex. You're looking at bespoke, which is then a terrible way to try and support a business with a tech team going forward. But I think the most important thing is like I said, I think through the whole process is just listening. If you can have your 5 points that you want to understand about someone, what's their problem, and then you can, like I say, you can tie in your experience. I think Reese has been great at that in terms of talking about him getting sent, clothes that didn't match any of his target audience, so there's no ROI. Then some of his case studies around how he's helped people by finding the right influencers. But obviously,
you need to walk away, though. You see, you do need to walk away. So one of the things you raise is a very good point. That if you end up in a conversation and it actually isn't a great fit for your offering, walk away. And again, one of the fears of founders have is that there's an opportunity here, I can close it, but it actually doesn't fit what your technology does. And the biggest example of that, I think, is where we've created platforms that are B2B market focused, and you end up having a B2C style conversation. And you can convince yourself in your mind you can actually make that solution work, but it doesn't. And I think just picking up on the point you said at Reese, that's a good step into my fourth point. Because I think one thing that Reese is very good at Social Plug is he sits the customer side of the table. Now, he's passionate, and I think he has learnt and kind of adjusted his sales approach because he had so much to offer of so much genuine value. And the platform we built in Social Plug just enabled that to kind of deliver at scale. He was kind of a little bit overwhelmed, but I think what he does now very, very well is sit the customer side of the table. And I've kind of said to him, look, there's a script here: features, benefits, impact, evidence. And again, learning a script, there's nothing wrong in learning a script. You mentioned there, James, about, what are the 5 questions you want to ask a prospect, and have that so you can structure your conversation and just have a decision tree in your head. If it's yes, no, well, how you use that. And when you're talking about the value, talk about value from your customer's perspective. Sit their side of the table. Imagine yourself, you've got their problems. Why would I buy from you? That's a really, really powerful question. The features, the product, service description, what you do, the benefits, this is what it'll do for you, why we deliver, why we're different, the impact, the ROI. And again, you need to make sure that early on you are doing some pilots and some testing with some early adopters that evidence that it actually delivers what it says it'll do, and you can quantify that, because once you've quantified the ROI, you can then actually think of a quite smart pricing strategy. and the evidence, getting case studies early on. I think every 2 words that Reese uses is case study. But it's great because it really validates that people have seen value in what you've proposed, and of course you've actually delivered. So, again, just very, very simple phrase: sit your customer's side of the table during that sales process and sales conversation.
It's, like I say, I think it's why I've always enjoyed using Reese these examples, because I think he's done that really well in terms of being willing to do some small things. And, obviously some of the conversations around the pricing, because they were such early adopters, he was willing to obviously change that. But by being able to prove the ROI and combining that with the story and building that relationship actually means moving into that critical conversation of, well, I've done this for other people. I've shown I understand your problem and I've experienced that problem. Here's what I think we can do for you. It should be a really hard point for the customer to actually just say no, because you've already sold them, because you've been on their side of the table and told them what they want to hear.
Yeah, and I think that steps into my final point around storytelling, which could be a podcast on itself. It's one of my favourite pieces of helping our founders craft their sales proposition. We all think we are kind of logical decision-making people, but we're not. We're all emotional decision makers at the end of the day. And as you just said, if you've taken someone through in half an hour, 45 minutes, this structure around engagement, trust, the conversation, the value add, and kind of why I can help you, the storytelling then just becomes quite evocative and is part of this closing piece. So I think it's building and creating a storyboard around your case studies, but then just pulling out 2 or 3 things that you think make you different. And I think innovation is one of those aspects, is one element. Why we're innovative, why we're different, why we can offer you something that other people can't. And that's really our gig. That's what TSF is all about, creating innovation-led technology products and solutions that go, wow, I didn't know you could do that. And it's not necessarily about the deep tech. It's just about thinking about the user interface and the user journey. So I think innovation has to be part of your story. I think your own experience and knowledge. And if you think through every single one of the founders from Plytime, where, Ian and Lisa McCartney of nearly a decade building games, learn educational games. And we've just created a platform that, again, digitizes that, but they know about home tutoring and use of games to help children learn. So your own expertise and your background, I think, is really important. And then actually just, again, kind of opening up a little bit in terms of what your founder journey has been. Because people want to hear about success and the challenges you've overcome and how determined you've been. Because like I say, at this stage, you're asking some very early adopters to get the checkbook out and kind of, give you some money when you haven't really got a track record. So showing some real conviction and passion about what you've built is really important. That's the closing bit. You then I think once you've gone through those 5 stages, you've told the story. If you haven't convinced them at that stage, then you need to think through, right, what are the next steps? And I'm not an advocate of trying to close a sale on the first meeting. I think that's presumptuous and it's pushy. It's just making sure you create a call to action, or there is a follow-up to actually send a document or a note summarising the meeting when we can take our discussions further. So sales isn't about hard-nosed closing. It's about rapport, relationship, trust, credibility, evidence in value, and storytelling is really important and as a tool in your armory.
No, and I think Ian and Lisa's a great example for that as well. And when I first spoke to Ian, and I remember from obviously more from being a child than having one at this stage, but being convinced by a certain other person on the podcast to do my maths homework before I could go to football practice, that sort of thing. And I think the story of how they got their kids to engage with the games, to do their homework, and then the education piece was almost as convincing as what they'd done previously, because it showed they understood it, and the story was quite compelling. I can imagine a lot that people can relate to, whether that's either being convinced to do the homework or doing the convincing. I think the other thing you mentioned there as well around it's always the follow up and what's next, because one of the things we have noticed, especially with some of our startups going to bigger clients, is the person they can initially speak to isn't going to be the decision maker. So often they've had to have that conversation to then get the call to action to get the meeting with the next person, but putting the effort into that person, even if they're not decision maker, and having that internal champion to really try and help you through the process means that it's not just a case of, oh, you're not a decision maker, who is? Can I have their number? And you ignore them. If you take them on the journey with you, it can really help, especially if you're looking at bigger clients.
No, that's really good advice. That I think, if you've opened the door to an opportunity, you've had that initial conversation, this commit and the call to action phrase we've used, you need to work through what they are and be ready to go with that. And if you've got a good rapport at the end of the first or the second meeting, you then need to say, well, look, at the follow-up meeting, if you're not the decision maker, can we actually meet with that person or the budget holder, who is the economic buyer? So again, I think it's you've had a nice afternoon, you've had a good chat, you've had a nice cup of coffee. There's got to be a result from that meeting, and it's just your judgment as to how quickly, because you don't want to start pressing people. All of a sudden, you don't want to come out of character. You want to just be yourself, and you want to say, right, how do we take this forward? And just have that nice progressive conversation. So
basically, if they do it on The Apprentice, don't do it.
I think that's good advice. It's just old-fashioned selling, and it's not for me. So let me just kind of summarize half a dozen points. Really, I think there are those 5 steps. Really, the core sales process, building relationships, the critical conversation structure, sit at the customer side of the table, the features, benefits, impact evidence, see stuff from their point of view, and then storytelling. So they're, for me, a good framework for a founder who hasn't had any previous sales experience to give themselves structure. And there's nothing wrong with having a script in your head or even on your notebook as you're going into this meeting as prompts to give you the confidence, because a well-structured sales conversation really should add value to a prospect as well. It's not all about, yes, I'm moving down the sales funnel. They've actually got something from it. I think the thing I'd say to people listening to this is come back next week and we'll do the marketing podcast, because everything starts with marketing around the branding, the positioning, the pricing strategy, the content, all that sort of stuff. And I think we'll do that with Nairi, who's led the charge brilliantly for us and our startup. So it's not fluffy marketing. It's stuff that gets you in the market you want to be in with the right positioning, but it does start with marketing. And then have a customer mindset, not your own product mindset. We all fall in love with the tech we're building, but I think we've learned over the years actually is to think about it from a customer side, a customer perspective and a customer mindset. I'll repeat what I said at the outset. Every founder needs to be able to get their passion, expertise, and character into sales mode. You are selling yourself at the end of the day. Why would I buy from you? And I think that's really fundamental. I think you're on about demand generation and lead generation in the early days. Revenue and cash is obviously critical to the survival of a startup. But in the early days, it's actually just making some noise and getting noticed in the market. And lead generation is one of the key things we'll talk about from marketing. Never lead with price. Always lead with value, why you're different, the innovation piece, your expertise, your knowledge. Because ultimately, in those early couple of meetings, you're looking to create relationships, not transactions. Money's the applause. If this is the right offering at the right price, people will buy it. Yes, you need a sales process and you need a sales team to ultimately grow the business, but how you sell is really important about the value set you as a business have. And then storytelling and ultimately data and case studies are key enablers. Once you've kind of got 3 or 4 really good rock and roll case studies, and think about where you want them, reference back to the piece we talked around Tom, the different segments in your market and the different personas. Think about focusing on those personas, getting in front of them and getting case studies from those personas, and equally go for the high-hanging fruit. When we started to think about where the free up technology could be applied, we went right for the top. We went for the regulators in the water industry, because if we got their badge of credibility, it would be, be a huge statement of the technology works, the product works, it does well. So don't faff around with small friends and family referrals. Really aim for high-hanging fruit and meaningful potential first users and adopters. And then you just got to be consistent. You've got to be rabidly consistent about your sales activity. I think a founder should be thinking about sales and marketing 50% of their time, 50% on the team, 50% on the product. So yeah, there's a lot of work goes in on that. But seriously, 50% of your time on sales and marketing in those early days. Where's my market? Who am I selling to? How do I position it? Do some market research. Think about your pricing. There's lots of stuff there. But at the end of the day, if you don't sell your piece of Wizzo tech, you ain't got a business.
No, and I think, as I said, just conscious of the time because we've taken up quite a lot because there's a lot to talk about with sales. Having, make things easy where you can. Use tools like CRMs. We use HubSpot. Other CRMs are available to track your progress, give you those reminders to follow up. Just because, like you say, there's so much going on in a founder's head and in the founder's activity and what they need to do. Do what you can to try and make it as fundamentally easy as possible, so you can focus on what the main thing is. It's like you say, you're not, unless you are trying to start a charity, you actually need to start generating revenue.
Yeah, and we haven't talked anything about targets, but I think those initial targets for sales are, I've had 5 meaningful conversations this week. I'm going to have 8 meaningful conversations next week. I'm going to have 12, 15 the following week. It has to be rigor until you get to a point where you can afford to bring somebody in who can do that heavy lifting for you. So, yeah, I'll shut up now, conscious of the time.
I can never say to shut up because I think there's a lot of value to people there. But we usually end with what's your main takeaway, but I think we've just gone up through about 5, so I think we've already oversubscribed.
Yeah, the main thing is don't be frightened of sales, but you have to, and you have to do it. So happy to talk to anyone who wants to ping me or you an email, and we can unpack the 5 stages that we've talked around on this, and I'll perhaps put them in a blog and put them up on the website as well.
Yep, and for obviously you've already given the spoilers for next week with the podcast with Nairi on marketing, which really sort of handholds this one. So I think there'll be a lot of value in that, just as much as this one. So thank you very much for your time, Ian.
I enjoyed that. Good to chat.
And thank you everyone for listening, and we shall catch you on the next one.
Cheers. Ta-ra.
I think that just about wraps things up here. If you have any thoughts or questions on anything we've said today, get in touch, whether that be through our Twitter @RealTSF or email at hello@StartupFactory.tech, or feel free to drop in for a coffee and a chat. As ever, thanks for listening.